Launch LKN. We're really grateful that you're here tonight. This is the fourth event in our Infinite Possibilities series. I continue to think we're just getting tremendous talent from our area to speak on these different topics that we selected, and tonight is no different. So I think in this topic, which is a little different than some of the others, I believe you'll find it directly impacting Charlotte so closely, so I think it'll be really interesting for everybody. I do want to appreciate all of our sponsors. We actually have added a new sponsor, so I do want to point them out. Mark Mahoney is here with Jackrabbit Technologies, so thank you very much for being an additional sponsor. He actually reached out to us and really wanted to support the community, so we're so grateful for all the folks who help us make this possible and make the events free for you all to attend. So thank you very much for your support. Our format tonight is very similar to our other events, but as always, we're tweaking and trying some new things each time. Our speakers tonight are going to speak for they have about 8 minutes or 12 minutes or so on a presentation. Sorry. And so they'll be up here for about 12-ish minutes, and then we're going to give you guys about 8 minutes for each speaker to ask some questions. But we're also going to do that a little bit differently. We're getting technical, and we're going to have you text your questions to this number, and if you don't feel like putting that in your phone right now, Chris has so nicely put it on the board over here. We'll bring it back up a few times in the slides as well, but as you have questions, as you think of things throughout the night, you don't have to hold on to them. Send them over text. If you tell us who you would like the question to go to, that would be great if there's somebody specific that you want to answer the question. But like I said, the speakers will have Q&A time in each of their presentations, and then we'll do our typical ethics panel at the end of the presentation as well. So there's your phone number. Plug that into your phone. We'll look forward to getting your questions. Finally, I do want to take just a minute to introduce our MC for the evening. I feel very grateful for all of the people who help me each time we have one of these events. And this time, I was really lucky to work with one of our Launch LKN co-founders, Chris Boggiano. He really helped us, I think, streamline this topic because it is a really large topic. So I hope that you'll find that there's a nice flow with our speakers tonight. I think he found some tremendous people to educate you on this very important topic. So I'm very grateful for his leadership. I also consider him one of the absolute leaders in trying to help the startup scene in Lake Norman. He's been very active in that. There's never a person that he won't meet to talk to them if they're interested in that space. He helps a lot of the students here at Davidson. So I think that's awesome, and I'm very grateful to him. So I hope you'll appreciate him with me and welcome Chris to the stage.
It's my turn to thank Erica because she's really the brains of the operation here. She's the one who does all the coordination. She just came back from 10 days or so in Nigeria on a mission trip, and despite all of that, had everything orchestrated before and after. So thanks very much for all the work you do, Erica. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the Hub. So welcome to the Hub. This is our first time here. We've been kind of homeless, moving around in the months leading up to this, so it's finally great to be in our home. And I think that the topic for tonight it's actually pretty relevant. 2 years ago when I was in this building, it was this dingy old shut down mill where there was no functional electricity, there was just trash heaps everywhere. It was questionably safe to even walk around. And here we are just a couple years later. So it's really exciting to see this both for the college, the community, the town of Davidson, the Lake Norman area as a whole. But to get into tonight's topic, I picked the picture of the Jetsons, grainy and all. I love how old-time analog TV looks when you put it on a big slide. But I picked it on purpose because the Jetsons came out in 1962. And it's sort of obviously cartoonish representation of what the future would hold, or elements of what people in 1962 thought the future would hold. And the 60s were obviously a great time for the space age. The Xerox machine came out, all sorts of other cool things. But we did if you look back to then to what they thought the future would be today, it's kind of silly to see how inaccurate all of the predictions of the time were. And it's because humans have this flaw with how our brains think. We think very linearly. So we take 2 points, A and B, and then we just go right in a straight line, and we assume that C is going to be in that straight line. And so we tend to overestimate and underestimate the consequences based on whatever 2 points we pick. So turn of the century, I think the combustion engine was developed in the late 1800s. Model T came out in 1913, and so you have this pretty rapid change. Those 2 points are close together, and then people extrapolate out from there. And in the 1960s, somebody would have genuinely assumed that by today we'd certainly have flying cars, like absolutely, right? And so one of our speakers tonight, Stephen, is going to talk to us about autonomous cars. And so we can see hype versus reality about what's going to really happen there. We'll have flying cars by 2020 for sure, autonomous ones at that. Chris over here is working on an autonomous boat, so maybe that as well. But we also tend to underestimate how rapidly change can happen. So film cameras existed for 150 years or so. And in the year 2000, if you owned a camera, odds are highly likely you owned a film camera, where you took out a film canister and took it to a store for 24-hour processing or something like that, and then you got print photos back. And not a handful of years later, Kodak was out of business because no one saw digital cameras coming. And now I bet everyone in this room has a digital camera in their very pocket just a couple of decades later. So when change happens, it tends to happen rapidly. And so if you think of a city, these are really just finite examples. A city is this fabulously complex ecosystem. And in some ways, some things haven't changed. If I use this building as an example, if I pulled in a person from 100 years ago, they'd walk in here and they'd certainly know how to operate a door, and they'd probably know how to operate a toilet and some of the other technologies that haven't changed all that much. But then if you talk to them about the Wi-Fi or the PowerPoint presentation on the projector, it'd be like magic to them. I mean, that's basically what some of the future seems like to a person who can't actually have even foreseen what the future holds. And if you think about that from a city perspective, the fabulously complex interaction of all of these different things evolving at different rates of speed, it's really, really, really hard to ever predict what the future is going to be. But as the speakers who come tonight talk, I'd like you to think about these two things with any technology. You have evolutionary change, which are things that change gradually. The electric grid hasn't changed all that much in the past 100 years. But other things have changed really, really. My favorite is on the bottom left. For a couple thousand years prior to the invention of the telegraph, you wanted to send a message over a long distance. You wrote it on a piece of paper and you got somebody to carry it by horse or ship. And then somebody invented the telegraph, and very, very rapidly you had instantaneous communication over long distances. And I would argue that the internet of today is just an evolutionary change from the telegraph that came out in about 1850. But all of these things in the city and all the technologies you hear about today, just ask yourself, is that an evolutionary change or a revolutionary change? And if it's one or the other, what impact could that have? So our speakers tonight, I've got Meg over here, Meg Fensel from Sustain Charlotte, who's going to go first. And then we've got Stephen Welch from Autonomous Vision, and Pete and John from Rocus Networks. And last on our panel, we'll have those folks and David Howard from NCDOT joining us on our ethics panel. So thanks in advance to all of our speakers. I'm just going to introduce Meg first, and then I'll come back and I'll introduce the others as they come. So I'm done with my little spiel here. We've got Meg going first, Stephen second, Pete and John third. Each of them is going to talk for, was it 8 minutes, John? Yeah, for sure. They're going to talk for about 12 minutes-ish, and we're going to take the balance of their time for Q&A. And that gives an opportunity to kind of ask questions as they're top of mind. And that'll take about an hour total to get through those, and then we'll round things out with the panel at the end, and we'll finish up around 7 o'clock or so with the kind of the formal portion of this evening. But to start things off, I've got Meg over here, just as a quick introduction. She comes to us from Sustain Charlotte. Her focus is on improving the quality of life in Charlotte through sustainability. And sustainability, like smart cities, is this big and sometimes vague term. And I'll let her talk about the examples. She's got some pretty cool examples of how, in a very direct and local way, sustainability and technology can improve your quality of life as a resident of Mecklenburg County or the Lake Norman region or North Carolina. Meg has a PhD from UT Austin in marine sciences. She's taught, I think, 9th grade math in Charlotte. So she's got some local on-the-ground experience that is highly relevant to the work that she does today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Megan.
Okay, thank you, Chris, and thank you all. What I would like to do to kick things off is really frame the issue of smart cities within the context of sustainability. We have a really simple definition of sustainability at Sustain Charlotte, which is just the ability to meet our needs today without compromising our ability to meet our needs in the future. And when we talk about needs, we all need certain things in common. We need a place to live, safe and healthy food, clean air, clean and sufficient water, convenient and affordable transportation, access to parks and open spaces, energy, and a job or at least an income to take care of all of those other needs. And I also tonight really want to share with you some examples of sustainability challenges that we faced in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg region. There are huge opportunities, especially in the Lake Norman area as this region grows, to avoid a lot of the growing pains that Charlotte has experienced. So I'll cover a variety of topics tonight with really a focus on transportation and the built environment. But I showed you all of those other needs because they are all very interrelated. The ways that we travel, the ways that we build our environment really affect our quality of life. And so we all need a place to live, right? But there's a huge sustainability challenge in our region. Our population growth in Mecklenburg County has been tremendous. We are one of the fastest growing metro regions in the entire country. And that population growth is projected to continue. So you can see that we grew pretty slowly up until sort of mid-century, and then it's just really taken off. So Mecklenburg County's population is now over 1 million people. If you look at just the city of Charlotte, it's expected to grow by 400,000 new residents by the year 2040. So within 22 years, we're essentially adding the population of Raleigh to the current population of Charlotte, and that's going to have tremendous effects on our quality of life. I next want to show you a series of 3 maps from the UNCC Center for Applied GIS. And these maps show the changes in land use over the past several decades. So this was what the region looked like in 1976. You have the city of Charlotte here in the center as a star, and these are the surrounding counties in North Carolina. And in 1976, the entire population in this region was just over 1 million people. And the human footprint, which is defined as the amount of developed land per person, was only 0.08 acres. So overall, about 95% of the region was forest and farmland, only 3% was developed, and 2% was covered in water. And so if we go forward 30 years, it's a pretty different scenario, right? So in 2006, the amount of developed land is 24%, so 8 times as high as it was just 30 years before. And that leaves us with only 74% of forest and farmland, but it's still the same, it's more people now sharing the same amount of land and the same amount of water. In 2006, the population had not even doubled from 1976, but the human footprint increased by 5 times over that same time period. And if that's projected out to 2030 with a sort of business as usual development pattern, this is what our region could look like. So it's really important to consider the effects of sprawl on a community. Sprawl is largely made possible because of the invention of the automobile. If we compare the Charlotte-Mecklenburg region to somewhere like New York or Boston or even San Francisco on the West Coast, those metro areas had their big population boom before cars were invented. They're really built on a much more human scale. They're built for people traveling on foot, traveling by horses. But with the invention of the automobile, that brought a lot of great changes, but it also brought a lot of challenges. And this very spread out nature of our communities creates a lot of challenges for us. The city of Charlotte passed its 5-year transportation action plan this past spring. And there's a statement in there that I really like. The best transportation plan is a good land use plan. Land use planning and transportation planning really have to go hand in hand if people are going to sustainably reach the places that they need to go every day. We have a tremendous challenge with congestion in our region. About 82% of commuters in Mecklenburg County drive alone to work, and that number really hasn't changed much in the past several years. And we've almost made it too convenient to drive, so people don't have much incentive to try other modes of transportation or disincentive to not drive, and that creates problems for air quality, for social equity, for economic mobility. So it needs to be at least as safe, affordable, and convenient to use other sustainable modes of transportation as to drive alone in your own car. So this 82% just includes Mecklenburg County, but we also have about 200,000 people per day who live outside of Mecklenburg County and commute in. And this data is from the Mecklenburg Quality of Life Explorer, which is an absolutely really world-class level dashboard for neighborhood by neighborhood information about a lot of quality of life metrics. So if you haven't checked it out and you're into data, definitely check it out. This is a map of the percentage of commuters who drive alone to work. And you can see that it is highest, this darkest color, in generally the wealthier areas of Charlotte. There's this widely repeated pattern across a lot of quality of life metrics where you have generally lower income areas in this wedge that runs from east, north, and west. And then the higher income areas tend to be Lake Norman and South Charlotte. So about 30% of people who live in Charlotte actually don't own a car, and they are more likely to not drive one to work. So I want to talk about transit for a minute. About 3.4% of commuters in Mecklenburg County use transit. The national average is about 5%. So we have some catching up to do if we're going to grow sustainably and not have horrible congestion on our roads. The good news is there's a lot of opportunities for innovation with transit and opportunities for smart cities. We've got a huge challenge in Charlotte in that the average one-way trip time on CATS, which is our transit network, for people who have to take more than one vehicle, if you have a transfer, is 90 minutes one way. It is really hard to take care of all the things you need to take care of in your life if you're spending 3 hours a day on the bus. So some of the things that can be done to improve transportation, specifically public transit from a smart cities perspective, are things like real-time apps. So CATS has a real-time app that they're working on improving now so that it will tell people when the next bus is coming. So you don't have to go out and wait for your bus 10 or 15 minutes before it's coming. Signal prioritization for buses so they can get between their origin and destination faster is being used in a lot of cities. So your bus doesn't have to sit behind a line of traffic. CATS is also piloting a first and last mile program with Lyft, where there's two stations on the Blue Line extension that have a geo-fenced area around them, so riders can choose to add a Lyft ride onto their transit trip. It's also important to ride, if you want to ride transit, to be able to walk to it. And within Mecklenburg County, only 67% of housing units are within a half mile of a transit stop. There was a study done that found that for every quarter mile increase to a walk to a transit stop, transit ridership declined by about 16%. And talking about pedestrians for a moment, this is actually Charlotte's only solely pedestrian street. It's Brevard Court, also known as the French Quarter, so just a bit of trivia for you. In order for people to be able to walk to transit or to bike share or to work, they need to have a safe way to do it, and sidewalks are a critical part of that infrastructure. Across the county, 42% of streets have sidewalks on at least one side. So you can see that that's really highest in the urban core of Charlotte. So there's a lot of catching up to do there. Last year, 27 pedestrians were killed just in Charlotte. That was the highest number ever. This is a nationwide trend. And there's a lot of reasons. I'd be happy to talk more about that. But the good news is that the City Council voted to spend $30 million over the next 2 years to build more sidewalks, but really that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg with their pedestrian program. So that's a doubling of the previous budget. Shifting over to cycling, we have only about 0.2% of people who commute to work by bicycle. And for comparison, Seattle is over 6%, Minneapolis and Seattle are high up there as well. Charlotte is not the easiest place to ride a bike right now. We rank 49th out of 52 cities for the percentage of bike commuters. And it also varies widely across the county. This is an index of bicycle friendliness across the county. And so in 2011, it was 1.4, and this is a relative scale where 0 is not at all bike friendly and 3 is quite bike friendly. And you can see that it's highest here in the urban core. Some good news for the Lake Norman region is that over the 5 years between 2011 and 2016, it increased quite a bit in the Lake Norman region. So y'all are doing some good things up here. So I just wanted to close by letting you know that one initiative that Sustain Charlotte has partnered with Charlotte Area Transit System and NCDOT on is a program called Way to Go CLT. It's an online dashboard where any member of the community or any company that wants to form a team can participate for free. And employees or just residents track their trips that they take on public transit, walking, biking, carpooling. And they have chances to win prizes. But the really awesome part of it is it has an app that connects to the person's account. So once they set that up, they just put their phone in their purse or backpack, and it automatically detects their daily commutes. And it gives them feedback. It tells them how much money they're saving, how many calories they're burning, what impact they're having on greenhouse gas emissions. So we're really grateful to NCDOT and also Kimberly Horn for funding that program. So I hope that I've given a little bit of context. I know it covered a lot pretty quickly, but hopefully that covered some context with land use and transportation, what can be done with Smart Cities approach.
Thank you, Meg. This is your chance to text in any questions. I'll go ahead and ask the first one. Just curious what, from a lot of what can improve the technology, the solutions that you proposed are reliant on data and data transfer from a bus to whatever else. What's preventing that from being adopted sooner, or what are the barriers to adopting that sort of technology sooner? That if you could talk to that.
So I think one of the challenges is that not all of the data is open, and this is what is difficult, is because there's companies and entrepreneurs who are investing a significant amount of time to collect this information and analyze it. And then cities are trying to find the best way to get the data affordably. They often have limited budgets. So often the city's kind of structure or budget for getting data and analyzing data has not really kept up with the market. So I think that's one challenge. Another is, just the cost of enabling GPS technology on transit vehicles. It has been happening at a more, I would say, organic level with cycling. There's an app that a lot of cyclists use called Strava, and cyclists can use it to track the routes that they're taking and to calculate how far they're going, how many calories they're burning. But Strava is able to then take that data and consolidate it, look for patterns, and sell it to cities.
Got another question. It's funny you mentioned top-down versus bottom-up. This might fit into that a little bit, but what do you think about bird scooters from someone in the audience? I think those are the battery-powered scooters that you see down in Charlotte now. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Charlotte DOT took a very cautious approach to allowing dockless bike share. They, instead of just allowing it to be kind of a free-for-all, which proved problematic in some cities where lots of bikes were just dumped without any kind of oversight. Charlotte allowed 4 companies to come in last October with a number of guidelines. So they had to have a minimum number, a maximum number of bikes. They had to have an on-site or a manager for each company who lives in Charlotte who will manage the program. Their phone numbers of each manager is on CDOT's website, and they have to respond to complaints within a certain amount of time. So it was rolled out very cautiously. CDOT is collecting data. If you go on their website, they have the data posted through May for the overall number of trips that have been taken by dockless bike and by scooters. So the scooters were kind of brought in and sort of just deployed on the streets without approval. And then they were all taken off the street very quickly, but then the company came to an agreement with CDOT and they were back out a couple days later. I work right along the rail trail that runs along the Lynx Blue Line, and I see hundreds of people going by on scooters every day. So I think there are some challenges to be worked out with, they're not quite bikes, they're not cars, so where's the safest place to ride them? it's something that will have to be navigated, but we already are seeing people who would probably not ride a bicycle, ride a scooter. So there's a lot of potential there if it's deployed correctly.
Okay, so we got a ton of questions, thank you. I'm trying to read through all of them, but let's see. So this one, are you working with the tech industry to enable startups to develop smart city solutions? So does the city make an intentional effort to interact with startups, or do they let the startup kind of show up, deploy scooters, and then that's what gets the city's attention? And I know you don't speak for the city, but I'm just curious, are there proactive outreach efforts?
Yeah, so yeah, as a nonprofit, we try to partner with the city on initiatives and make introductions where it's appropriate, but we also are independent of government. There are some efforts within government to work on innovative solutions to challenges. It was an old I think it was originally a horse barn back in the early part of the century, but it's being transformed to a sort of innovation hub to work on solutions to recycling challenges now that the global market for recycling is drying up. So I'm not aware of any large-scale government-led, local government-led initiative for specifically reaching out to tech companies to work on transportation issues. But one thing I always try to emphasize to people is that these government transportation meetings are open to the public. The governing body of CATS has a meeting every month, and it has a 3-minute public comment period before it. The Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization meets monthly, and they have a 3-minute public comment period. City Council does. There's also the City Council Transportation Planning meeting, and you can always talk to people afterwards. It's a pretty small community of people that are working on these issues at the government and nonprofit level. So just start coming to meetings and meeting people.
I had another question. It was about fiber optic access or broadband access and telecommuting. And I've heard, most people, myself included, I didn't show up here until 2 o'clock today because I was working from my house. And that can be a massive quality of life boost for a lot of people, but it can also have an impact on sprawl if it reduces the cost of, I think we're sticking too close. If it reduces the cost of sprawl or transit time, where I can just build my house anywhere. So do you have any thoughts on that, just on telecommuting, sprawl, transit time? Is telecommuting a solution, or does it contribute in some way to make it more of a problem?
We do promote telecommuting. It's one of the ways that people can earn points in the Way to Go CLT app. Something I like to tell people is that when you look at the way that congestion happens, congestion is almost always worse at the afternoon rush hour than the morning rush hour. And so what often drives states and municipalities to have to build more roads or to widen roads is that peak traffic volume in the afternoon rush hour. So if work schedules can be adjusted as the population of a region or a city grows, and a smaller percentage of people are kind of clogging the roads during the afternoon rush hour, that can make the difference between whether a new road gets built or not. So I would say there is a potential that people, you can live from anywhere, but there's also a lot of potential for tackling some of the congestion issues.
I had one more question. How did Chris grow such a sweet beard? We're going to defer to Pete on all beard questions. He's coming up in just a little bit. So I'll jump to another question here. Can you mentioned a dashboard. I know the City of Charlotte has a variety of different data sources, given that there's a sort of tech community here in the room. Are there any that you can point to and share if someone wanted to access sort of raw data, if they wanted to do something with themselves to encourage more of that organic? Are there any resources in particular you'd point the community to?
I would say, starting with the Mecklenburg Quality of Life Explorer, there's a lot of data behind that you can grab. I would also go to the Charlotte Department of Transportation's website. They have an annual traffic safety report. They have a lot of data about traffic volumes in different parts of town. Also, every transit agency is required to submit their ridership number. So if you're interested in looking at transit ridership and optimizing transit, that's also publicly available, and I'm sure there are people in the room who could point you to even some more additional data sources.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Meg. We've got a ton more questions. Sorry I couldn't get to everybody's, but keep them coming for the next speaker. So, but thank you very much for everything. It was great. I'm going to introduce Stephen Welch here. Stephen comes to us. He's a senior machine learning engineer at Autonomous Fusion. And Stephen's background, he had previously got into machine learning via neural networks, working on acoustics. Was it a startup you founded or were part of?
Yeah.
So founded a startup, and that's kind of what got him into machine learning. He's gone to Georgia Tech for electrical engineering, UC Berkeley for environmental engineering. And fun fact about Stephen, he's got a big YouTube following with Welch Labs. I think a couple 100,000 followers and some videos with a couple million views apiece. So if you want to learn about neural networks or some of this stuff, but he's going to talk to us tonight about autonomous vehicles and some of the technology that powers them. Thanks, Steve.
Great, thank you, Chris. All right, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Erica, for inviting me and organizing. I'm happy to be here. This is a great space. Okay, so 12 minutes. I'm going to try to give you an overview of what's happening in autonomous driving and try to actually include some technology and some algorithms, which is a challenge in 12 minutes, but I'm going to do my best. Okay, so a useful way to break apart autonomous driving is into three areas: perception, localization, and planning and policy. So we'll spend a little time on each. I work on the first one. Okay, on the perception side, the first thing to know, these are supposed to be numbers that kind of hard to see. First thing to know is that images and video data are a huge amount of data, even by today's standards. So an HD video, for example, has around 2 million pixels. Each of those pixels has a red, green, and blue intensity value, a number associated with it. And if you take HD video, for example, it's 188 megabytes a second. You can do math, so it's a lot of data, and our brains are really, really good at processing this data, and it's easy to forget when you go to design an algorithm to do this, how much data you're dealing with. So that will kind of inform our discussion. A little bit of history is really helpful when you think about autonomous driving. This is the first autonomous vehicle that's like 1987 or something. That's called the Autonomous Land Vehicle, the ALV. It was a government-funded project. It spent around $10 million. This is how their vision algorithm works. It was very simple by today's standards. So I told you that every pixel has a red, green, and blue value. If you plot them on a scatter plot, those are all the pixels, and you do this little projection trick, you can sort your pixels by color. What this is really doing, it's picking out the red pixels of the road, and here I'm highlighting the blue. That's how the ALV works. So I know that was a quick overview, but the idea is it looks for a specific shade of color. It says that's the road, and it uses that to guide driving. As you may have guessed, this is not how your Tesla works today, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Now, a point I want to make about this approach, though, is when the engineers on the ALV team set out to make their solution, they wrote the rules themselves. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, that's way louder, right? Okay, did you hear anything I've said so far? The big point about this slide is that when the engineers on this team in the 80s, when they built this solution, they wrote the real rules themselves. So the engineers relied on manually written rules. Now, as you can imagine, this approach does not scale very well. So here are 4 other videos with the same algorithm. So it's trying to pick out the road. The blue is where the road is supposed to be. You can see here on this desert drive, it thinks that the road is this mountain. Not good. The trees are the road in that top image. So the point here really that I'm trying to make is that when you sit down as an engineer and you try to write the rules for computer vision by hand, manually, your solution is unlikely to generalize. It probably won't work on all videos. So that's a real challenge. And that was probably the earliest big challenge in computer vision for autonomous driving. So a few years later, at Carnegie Mellon, this smart guy named Dean Kornbluh, he asked a really, really interesting question. He said, okay, maybe we can't write down the rules manually to drive a car, or to at least see the world well enough to drive a car, but maybe we can learn them, right? Maybe we can use a learning algorithm to learn how to drive a car, which is a really cool question. And he posed it in a really neat way. So, we talked about, video like this. This is our test track in Atlanta. Video like this, it's just data, right? So can I learn a mapping from these numbers, from this data, to a steering wheel angle, for example? Because really, when a human steers a car, that's kind of what we do, right? So we take some images through our eyeballs, and we say, okay, I should turn the wheel this way. So Dean's question, he said, okay, algorithm to do this. So the question we left off on was, if a programmer can't write the rules of driving, can we learn them? So this is a neural network, which, raise your hand if you've heard of a neural network. Okay, a lot of people, great, fantastic. Okay, so this is the inside of one, or one way to visualize the inside of one. This is the neural network that Dean, the person from the last slide, used in the 80s. And I'll just give you a quick overview of what's happening here. So this curve in the upper left-hand corner, that's the loss function. It measures how similar the algorithm is driving to a human. So the lower this plot goes, the closer our algorithm is to a human driver. In the upper right-hand corner, this is the output of our algorithm. So the red curve, that is our human steering angle. So the y-axis is degrees. So it starts at -100, so that's our human turning really far to the left. And then, so you can see that as our algorithm learns, the yellow, which is our algorithm, approaches the red. So our algorithm is learning to turn the steering wheel like a human would. Last thing on the slide, so a good follow-up question might be, okay, it learned, but what did it learn, right? What representation of the world did it learn? And these are what are called the feature weights. These are multiplied by the image. And you can see that as we're training, we start to see some structure here. And remember, hopefully this won't break anything, our data look like this. So you can see these lane markers in our data. And you see that our algorithm, as it gets down there, these lane markers will pop out in these features. So you'll see right here, see these lane markers? So this algorithm, having no prior knowledge of what a lane marker is, learned what a lane marker looks like. So that's pretty cool. And this was all in the 80s. Okay. Oh, there's supposed to be videos up there. Gosh. Okay, I can go there. So this is a model from the 80s. Just recently, NVIDIA, the graphics card maker, did the same exact thing with a much, much larger model. Up here is supposed to be a video of the NVIDIA car just rocking it. So this approach has scaled well over time. You can learn this kind of thing. Now, there is a bit of a catch here. The catch is that this kind of machine learning for autonomous driving is very difficult to test and make safe. So my bet, and a lot of people in the industry are betting, that you won't see this in products. This is not in the Waymo drives their car. I guess they're not showing up. Sorry about that. All right, third time is the charm. Sorry about that. Okay, so we should be good from here on out. I will move quickly. This is the video I was trying to show you. So just recently, NVIDIA did a very similar approach. And it does very well. This is NVIDIA's car cruising along. This is the Carnegie Mellon car in the 80s. It had a top speed of 2 miles an hour. And you'll see in a second, the grad students would sit in the back and actually write code as they drove. Okay, and here we have Tesla today. Hopefully that's how it goes. Cool. So this is how Tesla sees the world today. It's not quite like the technology I showed you so far, but there are some big similarities. So instead of directly learning to steer the car, Tesla learns to pick up relevant features in the environment. So as we're driving, it's detecting lane markers, vehicles, pedestrians, things like that. But it's still using a learning approach. So using deep learning specifically and large labeled training sets, Tesla detects relevant environmental features and uses those to drive. Now, the point I want to make, the last point on perception, is that even though vision systems have gotten very good, they are not perfect. So here's Tesla in a tough situation. In autonomous mode, it would have hit that barrier. This is actually the location of the most recent fatality. This is not that video, but it's the next day. So as good as these perception systems are, they're not perfect. You can see the lane markers pulling the Tesla off to the side, and there's a barrier there. The question is, if you're going to make safe autonomous cars, how do you deal with that? And that really gets us to our second item here, which is localization. So the idea in localization is that I've driven somewhere before. I can make a map of that area and use it next time I drive there. So localization is all about very accurate maps to make autonomous driving safe. This again is our test track in Atlanta, Georgia. And you can imagine that after you do one lap, if you remember where you've driven before using a map like this, the next time you drive more safe. That's the idea. Okay, so there's a few companies working in this area, a couple big ones. This is a LiDAR-based map. So you may have seen LiDAR units before, those spinning sensors on the top of autonomous cars. So they provide very, very, very high quality data. You can see this point cloud is incredible of LiDAR points. And then they automatically extract relevant features from the road. These maps are very, very, very accurate, but they're expensive and they're very data heavy. You can actually buy a car today that uses LiDAR-based maps. This is interesting for some of our city smart planning, I think, conversations. So Cadillac Super Cruise is a level 2 autonomous system that uses maps. The complication though, so I mentioned that these LiDAR-based maps are very, very heavy. So all the maps live in a hard drive in the trunk, so it takes up a lot of space. And the maps are only updated once a year. So the system has just come out, and you can imagine on areas like I-77, there's a lot of construction, the maps are frequently going to be out of date, right? So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I don't think once a year is going to be enough for a lot of the areas, so we'll see what happens with Super Cruise. Overall, though, it's a great technology as far as I've heard. There's another approach to mapping I want to mention very, very briefly from an Israeli company called Mobileye. They were acquired by Intel 2 years ago, $15 billion. So they use a crowdsourced mapping approach. So instead of using LiDAR, they use cameras. So every car that has a Mobileye chip in it is making the maps better. However, they're not as accurate. So not as good as the LiDAR maps. We'll see what plays after it. There's kind of this battle in the industry right now. I'll skip the slide. There's other cool map approaches out there that are coming along. Last point, and I'll wrap it up here. So this is the planning and policy piece. So the third pillar of what I want to talk about today. So, right, this is the question. So if you had perfect perception, you could see the world around you perfectly, right? And you had perfect localization, you had an excellent map, you knew right where you were in the world, could you drive here? Could you drive in France, right? This is one spot in France. And the answer really is no. Because you have to navigate this really tough dance with other humans. I started my talk with a little bit about machine learning and about how I can find really unique solutions to complex problems. That's true here, but the problem is more complex. And the reason is that there's this feedback loop in the world. So when someone makes a decision, or an autonomous car makes a decision, the driver is going to react to that decision. So there's this loop. There's a kind of machine learning called reinforcement learning that can address this, but it's much more in the research phase. So this is where a lot of the exciting research is happening, planning and policy. How do I interact with the drivers? There's a long way to go. So if you don't see level 5 autonomy by 2020, this is why, because this piece is really, really hard. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much.
Steven, and thanks to everyone for bearing with us as we deal with our little tech snapper there.
I don't have that slide.
The phone number's back over here, and Erica's going to plug back in. But while she goes, I'll ask the first question. Is actually based on your last algorithm or your last bit there. With the reinforcement learning. Are there efforts to have cars communicate between different vehicles?
Yeah, wonderful question. So I hear a lot about that. So at my company, we aren't focused on vehicle to vehicle at all. I have one kind of negative thing to say about it, and I don't know everything about it, obviously, but from what I've heard, no mission-critical communication protocol has ever been implemented wirelessly. So, even the best wireless networks are not good at very, very fast responses, things that you need for mission-critical safety things. So I think that B2B communication will be important, but I don't think it's going to be that safety layer. And it could definitely help on planning and policy, but I think it's going to be a while. I guess I'm kind of wrong on vehicle to vehicle.
Another question here. With all of this data captured by cameras for perception and localization, what kind of compute and memory is needed to run these systems?
Yeah, good question. So we spend a lot of time on this at my company. So there's a ton of really great advances happening in machine learning right now. You can go get open source research algorithms off these, there's all these challenges and stuff, and you can get really great open source work. But a lot of it is crazy slow. Like, for example, like some of the best object detect, like you saw Tesla with detecting objects, right? Some of the best deep learning algorithms for detection will take 4 seconds per image to process on like a really fancy GPU. So if you're driving down the road and it takes 4 seconds to detect a car, you're out of luck. So yeah, it takes a lot of power, and part of the game that makes it fun is trying to make these like deep learning, cutting edge algorithms have fast inference times. So yeah, it can take a lot of compute. And I don't have specific numbers. You know, we have a level 2 demo. We just run it on a quad 4 Intel processor with a GTX 1070 for our setup. But some companies have much bigger stacks of car, and then out of car you need a compute cluster really to be doing anything serious with training your algorithms. Hopefully that answers the question.
Actually, another question on that is, with Tesla taking the lead on autonomous vehicles in some ways, and with electric cars in particular, I'll step away from the speaker here. But is there any interplay between those two technologies, or are they largely independent of one another?
You see a lot of overlap in the industry between EVs and autonomous. I don't think there's a good reason other than they're both innovative things happening right now. There is one minor thing, which is that if you ever build a drive-by-wire system, which is how you actually get your computer to make your car accelerate and decelerate, it's way easier on an EV because there's one gear, so you don't worry about shifting and all this stuff. So it is easier on an EV, but I think that's coincidental.
Another question is, should machine learning models be different for cars, even of the same model? Is there any reason why like individual cars would have adapted to whatever their unique circumstances?
Make sure I understand the question. So, I guess, I don't know if I can ask the question back. Do you mean for detecting a certain car, or the algorithm that would be driving?
I think the latter.
The latter, okay, sure. It depends on how your algorithm works. So at our company, the first thing we trained actually was an end-to-end model. That first thing I showed from the 80s, we started there because it's easy to get going. That model it's called overfitting. So we took our same model and put it in our second car, and it did terribly because it had kind of learned some of the quirks of the vehicle. That's not good if you're GM and you can make 10,000 cars, right? So we quickly worked on ways to mitigate that. So it can happen, but in a production environment, you do not want different algorithms. And it's hard enough to do quality control in any kind of machine learning. So you want to standardize as much as you possibly can.
So there's not really any learning going on in the car after it's been released, unless the software gets updated.
That's a wonderful question. Yeah. So I get a lot of questions about, is it learning as it drives? And no one is doing that now. It might happen one day, but that is a big can of worms. Because the thing is, these algorithms, because I told you at the very beginning, people wrote their own rules for computer vision. That was very deterministic, right? Now we're in the stochastic world where the algorithm can learn some powerful things, but it's never it's hard to validate what it's learned, right? So that's called online learning. It will be learning as it's driving. And I've seen one company do it, but it's real sketchy. Maybe in 10 years or something. But right now, everything happens offline, and you push software updates to your cars.
Do you think, I think this might be the last question, but do you think the algorithms will all converge and it'll be kind of a winner-take-all? Or will there end up being a series of different companies with their own proprietary algorithms?
Yeah, good question. I think definitely the latter for like the next 20 or 30 years, probably. Because there's so many specialized problems that you have to solve. So yeah, I don't think there'll be any one dominant architecture, is my guess.
Thank you so much. That was great, Steven. Our last speaker before the panel, our speakers, I've got Pete Sieber and John Britton. Just quick backgrounds on both of them. Pete is founder of Rocus Networks, which is located right here about 50 feet that way, on the other side of where you're eating sandwiches and stuff and got your beer. Pete comes from a consulting, banking, accounting background, and I think in the process of that, encountered a lot of companies that had some cyber vulnerabilities. John actually came out of the British military, electronic warfare is his background. He went to Wells Fargo, where they have a cyber fusion center, and then began working with Pete in the last couple of years. But they're going to talk to us about the cyber risks associated with some of the technologies that smart cities might adopt.
Perfect, thanks Chris. With my background, one of the first things I learned was never go anywhere alone. That's why I've got John. One of the first things John learned in the military was always have a bigger gun. So he's the bigger gun. I'm going to start off real quick and then turn it over to him. A lot of times, all this great stuff that we talk about, right? Smart cities, autonomous cars. This is, as humans, as you said early, right? We like to think about how we get from point A to point B as quickly as possible, and we choose to think about the things that we want to think about. There's a lot of things that impact it that we choose not to think about or don't have deep enough conversations about. This is the whole world of risk. So here's a basic equation of what we consider risk to be. It's been widely adopted. Risk is a mathematical equation. Threats times vulnerabilities times consequences gives you your risk, right? If you're good at math, you've noticed that this is not only math, this is multiplication, right? So if any one of those factors is 0, then the answer is 0. Unfortunately, in the world of cyber, you cannot reduce your threats to 0. You try to control your own vulnerabilities to 0, and the consequences of the actions are never 0, right? So from a business perspective, and even in this world, you have to look at all three: the threats, the vulnerabilities, and the consequences. And I think when we get to this neat stuff of autonomous cars and these different topics, we don't always think about the negative consequences. Right? The what can go wrong, right? Why is it a headline and everybody's shocked when the first autonomous car crashes, right? It's going to happen as we learn and we get there, right? But what happens when this proliferates and gets bigger? And what happens when you have 10,000 autonomous cars on the road that are predictable on the road with traditional driver cars that are not predictable? And how does all that interact and work, right? So this whole world of consequences. And that's one of the things that John's going to address as we walk through cyber risk as it relates to threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences.
Thank you. So good evening, everybody. So I'm not necessarily an expert at all in autonomous vehicles. I worked within cyber previously to that, Wells Fargo with banking against cyber, and then prior to that, the military. So this was definitely a learning curve for me. I had to do a lot of background checking and research and all that stuff. So by no means is it going to be as complex as yours, Stephen, but I'm glad to think that some of it, from my opinion, was close. So I went right back to the basics. I wanted to work out what autonomous vehicle was, and realistically it's artificial intelligence. And AI is broken down into 3 areas. You have advanced intelligence, which most people will identify being like the Terminator, the computer that eventually take over the world. You have artificial general intelligence, and that's going to be computing power to the peer of a human. And then you have what we currently have, narrow intelligence, which is a computer that is based by rules and information and can only do singular tasks, like Deep Blue, the chess playing computer. So I've identified, and obviously it's quite well known, but most of the intelligence we have out there and computing power is at the narrow level. And so I took that into a lot of the news articles that I read through and articles I got to relate to AI, and we came to a nice understanding that AI and humans, really as we speak now, are a big pain point. Stephen mentioned to a slight way with the Arc de Triomphe in France. Wow, that's not a word. But basically, AI and humans can't interact. Humans are working at the general intelligence level, so we have the capabilities to be erratic. We have the abilities to think on the slide where a narrow intelligence computer does not. And as you can see by these 3 examples, we are obviously getting impacted by that. Uber recently flipped a car. There was a Google car that recently hit a cyclist, and then obviously from San Francisco when Google had a fender bender. So to identify obviously a bad area that we are having that interaction between humans and computers isn't exactly working, but in some industries it would work very successfully. The agricultural industry, obviously this is a concept vehicle, it's a tractor, and basically that's in a rural area where you're taking away the humans, and the functionality of the tractor is basically drive in a straight line, do a turn, come back, and there's a lot of autonomous features on tractors nowadays with sensors identifying when the trailers are full and so on and so forth. The other industries you have with machinery, building south, so for car manufacturers, they have autonomous machinery, And the whole piece of AI is to basically take away repetitive tasks that humans will eventually fatigue and obviously incorrectly do, whereas machinery can be trained to do the same thing over and over again successfully, far superior to what any human being can, especially with the very small machinery. And then one of the latter areas of the utilization for AI is in factory equipment, and an example of that would be Amazon. They have factories for their warehouses that the machines work in conjunction with one another, and they very regularly, well, from what I could see, report any issues. And what I find for this is, the main reason behind this is because it is a sole plane of artificial intelligence. There is no interaction, very minimal, with humans as we today. So there's sort of two conclusions, two questions to that is, well, how will they get better? It's either the intelligence has to go from narrow back up to general to meet the same peer as a human, or as a smart city, we have to create a border where you get past the 485, no gasoline cars you can have any artificial intelligence with. That'd be great if the government could provide that, which NCDOT, you can tell us that next if you want. But very likelihood today, they're probably not, so maybe by the year 2025. So one of the main points for this evening I got asked to was highlight some pain points, and me being military, I kind of came up with a scenario of how I, as a IT cyber professional, would attack them. And it actually felt quite well with timing. I recently bought a car. It's a very nice minivan. It's a hybrid, but it has autonomous features to it. And I went to the dealer on Friday, and I was like, hey, I'd like to buy that car today. And he turned around to me and said, sorry sir, we can't sell you that car. And I was like, I work with salesmen all day, I know this pitch. And he's like, no, I would like to sell you, but the manufacturers have banned us from selling it because there's a firmware issue and the car requires a patch. I was always sick. I deal with patching issues all day, vulnerabilities here, vulnerabilities there. Now I'm having to buy a car that I have that same argument with. So I came up with two questions to him. I was like, well, what happens if I bought it yesterday? And he said, well, sir, we'd have phoned you up, we'd have told you about the risk, and you just have to accept that. And with that, don't press that button. I was like, great. My second question was, how do I go about then getting a patch? And his answer to that was, well, you can either come into the office and we'll do it for you. It takes about 2 hours. I was like, nope, not happening. Or you can do an over-the-air patch. Now, autonomous vehicles, 100 million lines of code. A jet fighter has 8 million, just as a comparable. So you can imagine there's the amount of lines of code, there's a lot of vulnerabilities in there. So to get a patch, you conduct it over the air, so by Wi-Fi, by mobile connection. And what that opens up is an inherent risk of somebody like me in my previous job to intercept that, decrypt it, manipulate it, poison it, re-encrypt it, and then upload it to your vehicle. So that's my stage one. If I targeted the vehicle, that's what I would do. I would put a patch that had a vulnerability in there. The next stage, as my attack goes on, obviously I'm being really aggressive, but I wanted to identify a pain point of where I would exploit this vulnerability that I've now put onto the vehicle. And to that, I needed to trace and track the vehicle to identify their routes, their daily understandings of what they do. So if I had physical contact, I could steal the GPS data off the vehicle, it's stored, and basically lay that to a map, and I know exactly where you're going. Every single day I drive from Matthews at 6 a.m., so I commute early to avoid traffic, and I leave at 4, but I do that journey every single day. There's a lot of roadworks and pain points for me that if I obviously didn't pay attention, I could crash. So the other alternative, if I don't want to have me being identified as somebody trying to hit this vehicle, I can use the mobile network to trace the vehicle. I create a connection between myself and the vehicle. I stand off at a larger distance, and now I can track the vehicle all around the city based on its connection to the mobile network. So once again, I'm now stealing information, although metadata, that I'm laying up against the map, and I'm able to identify your route. So even if this was a two-part attack or complete two different scenarios, I'm able to follow you without really following you. And then my final piece to the attack, obviously Stephen talked about how the systems and the machinery works to identify features on the road, and at a bare level, it's using frequencies. And obviously the examples are there for the frequencies. This was definitely my niche in the military to identify these. So the vulnerability, the hypothetical vulnerability that I put on the vehicle is if on the right-hand side of the vehicle, the distance goes from 3 feet to 3 inches within half a second, it will swerve to the left. So I take my vehicle, I put some transmitters down the left-hand side, utilizing the same frequencies. I get alongside to everyone else, I look like a bypasser. I also transmit, and that blinds the vehicle, manipulating the code, and obviously, because of the vulnerability I put onto the vehicle, it swerves and potentially crashes. So if I'm trying to target them because I'm a competitor, I've now potentially gained dominance because they're having to recall vehicles. And I know obviously that's a 3-part attack, which is a bit aggressive, but even if that wasn't the case, the inherent threat for anybody using autonomous vehicles, which, if anyone read the news last week, the FBI is stopping insider threats, and the insider threats are everywhere. And really, that's it. Like I said, I'm not necessarily an autonomous vehicle expert. I work in cyber, communications, and all that good stuff, but just from an external point of view, I've come up with 4 real, potentially, Stephen, you could say that these texting weights is probably saying they're not real, but there are apparent risks, and with every piece of technology, we need to understand that. And then from a cyber security point of view, we need to try and minimize that. So, thank you.
I think you know the drill by now, asking the questions. I think that's a really great way to highlight the risks of any new technology. And if you think about any technology that we adopt, as you're the one developing the technology, you're mostly worried about getting it to work under normal conditions, not having an adversary, whether it be a nation state or just a bad guy of some other flavor or a commercial competitor trying to actively undermine you. So the complexity of implementing that technology goes even further. So let's see, can't hack a bus, though, can you? I guess if I'm not sure the point of the question, if that was if you can't hack a bus that is not digital. So one of the arguments that people make for stuff not going futuristic is that it's less likely to break, right? It doesn't work as good as the older stuff. How should government regulate or defend against these attacks? Well, that's a big question. If you could sum that up in 30 to 60 seconds.
So, if you look at the bigger picture, governments, cities all over America are struggling. One of the other features to this conversation tonight was meant to be about smart cities. And one of the things that we realize when we work with our clients is we come in, we express to them the stress points, the vulnerabilities that they could have. And the one thing that we identify, especially with some of the interactions with the government agencies that we do deal with, is that they have a lack of funding, a lack of expertise, because they're not this Fortune 500 company that's worth billions of dollars. They're limited by tax money to improve themselves. So I think, all in all, it needs to be a change in the way the government and we, as obviously citizens, I am a citizen, I'm totally, of the US, I don't want to question that, wow. But basically, because the governments are so struggling for their funds and everything, they don't have the resources that are available to the bigger companies. So for us, if we are going to advance and have these features available to us, more money needs to be made available to them. Because otherwise there is going to be somebody in a foreign country or somebody who's bored or who will try to exploit that. I don't know if I've really answered the question because
It's a tough question,
Yeah.
right? It's something I think we're wrestling with.
Realistically, more resources need to be made available and more education to all expertise to enhance the capabilities at the base level, and you're going to work from that up.
Awesome. So 2 questions, very similar. Would you own a fully autonomous car given the risks you just outlined, and what year will you be driving an autonomous vehicle?
So, like I said, the minivan I have has a lot of autonomous features. I had broken it 3 times, and would I love the idea of having a Tesla. Pete, if you want to give me a pay rise, I'll buy one. But I guess to a certain extent, yes, I'm a crate for technology, but at the same time, I am old school, so even though I have all these autonomous features on my vehicle, I tend not to use them. Every time I have played with it on the vehicle, it keeps me in the lane, but then I'm finding all these issues with it where it's not quite sensitive enough or it's too sensitive. So as it gets on, if I can prove when we have months of years of people not crashing, yes, I will really, I drive an hour a day to work and an hour back. So the productivity for me to run the car to drive is amazing, but then I have to do the risk analysis of, is the risk worth the reward? Because in most cases, there was a hypothesis that don't ransomware is ransomware, but when you start talking about a moving vehicle that you're in it now becomes killware because the chances are you could die. Wow. Very morbid, but yes, I would.
Awesome. So if you were on the other team and you were trying to protect autonomous vehicles, I know you don't know, you're not an expert on technology, but are there any obvious things you would be looking at or you would encourage someone like Steven to look at?
In a lot of communications, like the radio communications, a lot of timing signals are utilized. So you have the availability of machinery to go down to the microsecond for transmissions. And a lot of times I've used electronic countermeasures to deny radio-controlled IEDs out in Afghanistan. And one of the ways that we defended against that was to utilize a timing sequence that was top secret, nobody knew the sequence of how it worked. And having that utilization would stop somebody who is more of a just off-the-cuff designer to create something that transmits constant. So you could wipe out that by having the timing sequence and it will have that. But then additionally, rather than just utilizing one technology at one frequency, utilize multiple with available functionality to it. And then obviously you've got to go to the basic. It has to have that manual override just in case or a function that it stops. So there are plenty of ways.
I think we'll see a game of one-upsmanship over the years ahead. There'll be measure, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure, and who knows where it'll all end up. But last question. It's a great presentation. What exactly is that on your lapel?
Everyone says that. It's a fishing hook. I don't fish, no. It's a fly fish.
Great. I'll invite all of our speakers and David up on for our panel now, and we'll get into our panel. But thanks so much. I've already introduced the other speakers, but we have one additional person joining us, David Howard. I'm going to read off his title because it's a mouthful. He's the Chief Deputy Secretary at the NC Department of Transportation. I would rattle off all the things he's in charge of, but the simplest way for me to think of it is he's in charge of everything in North Carolina with respect to transportation that is not a highway. So if you want to get on a ferry or a plane or a bird scooter thing down in Charlotte, I think that might be in David's lane. David has served at the federal, state, and local level. He is from Charlotte originally. He served on the Planning Commission and on the City Council. He went from there to the federal government and the Federal Highway Administration under Anthony Fox, working on smart cities in particular, amongst a number of other different things. And as I said, now he's at the state, but I believe you still live in Charlotte and you travel back and forth. He's got his son with us today, who's spending some time with Dad. So my first question to David is, having grown up in Charlotte, and who here has heard about the inequality findings with Charlotte? For those who don't know, Charlotte was ranked 50 out of 50 as if you grew up in the bottom 20% of the population. There was a study by researcher Raj Chetty. If you grew up in the bottom 20% of the population economically, you had the lowest probability of making it into the top 20% of the population if you were from Charlotte. And they compared census data and tax records over the course of decades in this really big study. And over the past couple of years, it's provoked a lot of interesting conversations in Charlotte about what we can do about that. So David is someone who grew up in Charlotte, in West Charlotte, and you've been successful at again the city, the state, and the federal level. But what are your thoughts with respect to smart cities in particular? When you were at the federal government, we talked about losing out on a big smart city opportunity. Was it $40 million to Columbus, Ohio? And they specifically won because of their ability to, and it's not necessarily inequality, but to tie together people in the way that they work and they live. And so I'd just love to hear your thoughts on what Charlotte could be doing with respect to that opportunity, the lessons learned from it, and the inequality issue in particular.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you for the invitation. My good friend Mark McDowell's not here, so I'll try to represent him well. But first of all, I'd like to commend you all for just having the idea of putting together like-minded people who have interest in investing in things collectively. There have always been a lot of resources in the Lake Norman area. It's nice to know that somebody's trying to organize it in a way that can be beneficial not only to your pocketbook, but also to the region as a whole and society in general. Let me talk about smart cities a little bit, since what we heard is how it could apply, we heard why it's important, we heard a lot of things, and I'd like to start up here and work my way down real quick if I could. One of the reasons why I got interested in this whole idea of making this region a smart city region is because I wanted to make sure Charlotte stayed competitive when I was on the Charlotte City Council. I think we need to think about smart cities two ways. There's a horizontal application of smart cities we need to talk about, and then there are vertical ones we should be talking about. So the one that you're talking about, Chris, to me is more of a horizontal one. And that has to do with the fact that as technology evolves, we need to make sure that we're doing things to make sure that it is accessible and people across the region, no matter where you come from, can take advantage of it. So there'll be people, you know, like my good friends that are gonna go buy the new Tesla, and as soon as I can make more money, I'm gonna buy a Tesla too. So there'll be people who will be able to take advantage of those opportunities, but we need to make sure that along the way that we're doing things to make sure that the people who grew up where I did off of West Boulevard have an opportunity to take advantage of it as well. So Chris gave an example. While I was in Washington, if you remember, if you followed this at all, once Mayor Fox left Charlotte and became Secretary Fox of Transportation, one of the things that he did is challenge his country to think about kind of what the smart city of the future looks like as it relates to transportation. He did something unprecedented by making $40 million worth of financing of all kinds of sources available to a city who competed and who actually emerged from this competition. Charlotte competed. We were not happy that we were not on the short list. We don't like not being on the short list, do we? We're still mad at Amazon. But what happened is that the city that won, this is what I was sharing with Chris, you would think that the city that would win in something called Smart Cities would be a city that actually had the coolest something. I mean, you know, they looked like the Jetsons, that had, you know, some high-speed train that rode down the middle of, you know, I don't know, Trade Street or I don't know, something that would be just way cooler. And that's not what Secretary Fox had in mind, or the folks at USDOT. What they were looking for is a city who would actually take advantage of technology to help with their social ills. We can never forget that as a community, the reason why we invest something like transportation is so we can all be productive, but it's also so people can have access to education and healthcare and all those things that make us a productive society. So the reason why Columbus won is because Columbus took on one of their neighborhoods where they had measured that the infant mortality rate was higher than any, you know, higher than it should have been. And what they did is they figured out how to use smart technology, transportation technology, whether it be with people that are unbanked, people who needed transportation solutions, people who needed, you know, the first and the last mile, figured out how to make sure that those mothers had access to the doctor and those things that we know that would help make a child come here healthy and stay healthy. And they took that issue on, and that's what made them stand out. So the point there is never forget that if we're not making this scalable so that we're not a more productive, a safer, a healthier community, then we've kind of missed the point. I mean, you know, I was asking my son, what was the little thing that everybody was spinning a little while ago, the fidget spinner? I mean, essentially that's what technology is going to do. I mean, you know, everybody wanted one, now you can buy it for 99 cents. Because it comes and goes if you can't figure out something that has some human factor that is taken into consideration. I guess that helped us with stress, but it went away real quick. And that's what's going to happen if we don't figure out how to use some of this technology in a way that actually helps improve our lives.
Great question. And to the improving lives, I've got a question for Meg from some of the audience. Can you elaborate on transit in particular about how it can exacerbate social inequalities and how it can also help solve some of the inequity in Charlotte?
Absolutely. So the bus network does not get nearly as much press coverage as the rail network. They're both really important parts of the transit network. But in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, the bus actually carries 75 to 80% of the passengers. And with that 90-minute one-way trip time, that creates a real challenge for people. It was identified in the Leading Opportunity Task Force report in Chapter 5 as a factor that is holding back child and family stability. And so what I didn't tell you during my presentation is that CATS is entirely redesigning their bus network. They're creating more crosstown routes with shorter connection times. They're reconfiguring routes. They are increasing frequency. So it's important to have that real-time app so that you know when the bus is coming, but more data alone will not solve our inequality issues. We need to deploy that data in a smart way in the right context so that we don't accidentally exacerbate existing inequalities. I think there are often unanticipated consequences for some of the most vulnerable residents when technology is not deployed well. If we are only collecting data from people who are connected to the network, does that heighten the lack of information that's coming from people who are not connected? So I think there's a huge opportunity for a smart cities approach to improve transit. It also, it doesn't come without a price tag. We can add all the data and analysis to our networks, but if we're not investing in just that basic support, that basic infrastructure, more driver hours so that the buses will come by more frequently, technology to make crossing safer for pedestrians. And I think we have to be really careful not to go only down the road of technology. There are a lot of just really basic infrastructure needs that we have that are the foundation that have to be in place in order for a smart cities approach to work. So if there's no crosswalk to get me across the street, all the technology in the world isn't going to help that happen. So I think we still need to pay attention to basic infrastructure like sidewalks, crosswalks, but also really incorporate that and try to do it in new places where previously you may not have been able to do a mid-block crossing. But now with the pedestrian hawk beacons, in some places it is safe to put that pedestrian crossing beacon. I think there's also a huge opportunity to take advantage of some of the existing infrastructure that we already use, like streetlights. Schenectady, New York is experimenting with streetlights that have motion detectors, and so just like when you walk through the aisles of the grocery store, sometimes the lights come on and it's like the frozen food aisle is giving you a display of everything they have available. We can do the same thing with streetlights to save on energy costs at times of day when a vehicle may be coming by only every few minutes. So there's really a lot of approaches that can be taken with that infrastructure. Los Angeles is actually experimenting with having sensors on their streetlights to detect gunshots, to detect potentially even earthquakes and air pollution. So we really should be looking at the existing built environment and thinking about how we can optimize that, and then also how we can bring in entirely new technologies.
I'd like to just carry that question a little further forward, but back to David. From a government perspective, a lot of things always end up gravitating towards, well, we don't have the money to pay for it, or it costs a lot of money to pay for that. But a lot of technological innovation in the past decade, even Lyft, Uber, in terms of car sharing and autonomous vehicle technology as it becomes more prevalent in the decade ahead, that happens kind of alongside and mostly independent of federal, state, or local funding. So what's the role in your mind of government in, and again, it could be at the municipal, state, or federal level, wherever you think it's most appropriate in ushering this sort of stuff forward with an eye towards improving quality of life, whether you take inequality or any other measure you want to think about?
Well, I mean, until tonight, I actually was going to tell you that I think government has gotten behind on being the innovator. Until my friend showed me that the first autonomous vehicle back in the 80s was a government vehicle. And actually, the airplanes have been flying autonomous for a long time. So I think government has played a role still in kind of beginning the conversations like they did with the internet. And now it's evolved and industry's taken it and made it into a lot of other things. So I think government's probably still doing stuff we don't know that's more advanced than we can share at this point. And at some point it'll become something that the rest of us are onto and we can grow. The first time we all saw a stealth plane, we were like, wow, where have they been hiding that? So I mean, I think it happens. But I think as technology has evolved, the market should take the lead and run with it. I mean, you're right. Right now, we're chasing Google and we're chasing these other folks when it comes to where autonomous and all these things are going. I think our role is to provide the platform and then provide some regulatory overview of kind of where it goes. There is a small space, I think, in making sure that, as government deals with its own infrastructure, is made this shared and how we deploy that technology. We provide a platform for it. We provide partnership for it. Because we still do own all the right-of-way that all this testing will be done on. I mean, right now, North Carolina on 540 is one of the only places that, the federal government is allowing autonomous vehicles to test. I heard this a couple of weeks ago, have you ever heard of platooning trucks? It's actually the trucks talk to each other. I mean, you kind of only need one person in the front truck because you can maybe have 6 or 7 ones that will follow the lead of the front truck. So that testing just happened in Raleigh a couple of weeks ago. Government's still playing a role in being a partner, but I don't think government is set up to be the innovators of technology. I mean, we provide a great platform. We're using technology we've developed for defense and everything else, and now we share it with the community. But at some point, that's what the market is all about. You want the market to take the lead on that, and you guys are doing a great job, by the way. And that's where the investment opportunities come from.
Awesome. Your comments about the trucks actually made me think, I don't know, maybe this is best for Stephen, with the possibility of autonomous trucks for long-haul transit. The way that'll probably get adopted is rather than just autonomous trucks appearing on the road one day, you'll suddenly see a truck with another truck that's autonomous following it. So ultimately it's controlled by a driver and it's much lower risk. But if you could wave a wand and do that overnight, you would cut probably 2 million truck driver jobs out of the United States economy. And I just wonder if in your day-to-day job, Stephen, do folks talk about, it's one thing if we talk about our own car, and hey, I can do something useful while commuting to work, but do you ever have conversations about the economic impacts to the negative potential where someone's lost their livelihood as a result of the technology you're developing?
That's a great question. So we do have, I think, as far as the ethical concerns that we come up against, the one that really weighs on me more heavily is the making sure our technology is safe. And we're seeing, the first deaths from autonomous driving, so that weighs really, really heavily. And not to say that the economic impact of people losing their jobs isn't important, but for me and for our company, that's probably the main ethical conversation we have. I would say is safety first, and then I think that second point is important, but it doesn't come too much in the day-to-day.
Okay, no, that's fair. I don't know if, I was going to say to my cyber folks.
For ourselves, obviously I work in the Security Operations Center, and there's a term of case fatigue. So we respond to proxy incidents, to firewall incidents, and it is very repetitive. And one of the things that obviously we're bringing into it is machine learning and artificial intelligence to basically take repetitive tasks and remove them and allow my team to enhance their capabilities. So if you're saying for the fact that obviously you go from having 6 drivers to only requiring 1, I think as the manufacturer of that company or the owner needs to transition these people to either A, take on more haulage so they can obviously have more routes, so that will increase their productivity, or change the way that these drivers, because there still needs to be safety checks that are built, and these guys have been doing it for years and they know to check the tires, to check the pressure. And so the same for me is that as I change my basic rules, I'm enhancing my tier 1 to a tier 2 inherently, and therefore overall increasing their capabilities and then making them a better person. So for that haulage, I know it's going to be a massive up cost for that driver, but then what he can do is potentially put 2 drivers in one vehicle and do 2 journeys in one day. So it's just logistics, realistically.
Pretty good example of how humans are bad at, we think linearly, right? So who knows what the good side effects of those couple million truck drivers might be put to some other use that's better than driving trucks, but it's hard to see around that many corners.
Just a bit of different spin on it. The truck industry has been saying for a while that they lack the amount of drivers to keep up with the fact that we all want our Amazon Prime items delivered tomorrow. So because of that increased need, what we're talking about is, probably retooling their skills so that they can lead a platoon of several trucks, just so that we can continue to support this needed now habit that we all have. One of the things that being involved with government has taught me is that we depend on trucks and trains far more than we ever know. We do not grow it at Walmart, y'all. They have to bring it to it on a truck. They don't. I mean, so everything we depend on, we're not growing it close by. So I mean, you know, so at some point, I mean, I actually moved over for the trucks. They used to be in demand because we depend on them. Because that need is increasing so fast, actually, I don't know if we can keep up with the number of drivers that we need and them only drive the amount of hours that they can, you know, before they have to take a break. So actually, I think for at least a little while, I don't think we have to worry about truck drivers having a job if they're willing to get retrained on how the technology works and how those things work. Now, what that does say is that we're probably going to have more advanced drivers. It's probably going to be a little bit more than just a high school diploma. You got to do a bit more to understand how it works. But remember, we've done this before. I mean, every time we've had an industry. I mean, before North Carolina had textiles. Now, you can still have jobs in textiles. It just has to be in advanced textiles. So, I mean, you know, these jobs will evolve. What we have to do is keep up the training that's needed to evolve with the technology that's coming.
Oh, all great answers, thank you. Let me see if I've got any questions from the crowd, so you don't have to just listen to me online. We focused on Transportation Day, but smart cities have more to them, providing civil services, utilities, clean air, etc. Who's driving the roadmap for Charlotte? I don't know, I'll leave that to the panel. Who wants to volunteer to answer that?
It's a great chance to do a commercial. One of the reasons I got really involved, like I told you, is I wanted to make Charlotte competitive. I started looking around the world thinking about what cities had done it well. And the city that really stood out to me was Barcelona. Barcelona is kind of known as the mobile capital. Actually, that's a term. The guy who runs that, by the way, is one of your neighbors, John Hoffman. If you've never met him, lives up in the peninsula, and he runs this group called GSMA, who Mark actually introduced me to. But he actually kind of runs one of the biggest B2B conferences in the world in Barcelona every year. About 90,000 people show up to talk about mobile technology and where it's taking Charlotte. I got excited about Charlotte doing the DNC. And by the way, if you hadn't heard, we were awarded the RNC today. Come on, we can clap. There's a camera over there, so I'm going to be real careful. $100 million is $100 million. I don't care who pays it. But I mean, one of the things that became clear to me during the DNC is that one of the things that comes with that, what came with the DNC was a lot of improvement to our mobile network. I mean, a lot of it. I mean, if you think about this being the place where the president's going to be and all the people, members of Congress, they make it one of the safest places you can be. And they make sure the redundancies are in place. There was a lot of investment in mobile technology and antennas, you name it, that had nothing to do with the city or anything else, just from a safety standpoint. And I kept thinking, you know, what do you do with that technology after the DNC's gone as a legacy to take advantage of it? So I kept trying to talk about how we could position ourselves to take advantage of the infrastructure that was left. And we still didn't quite get it. I mean, I'm gonna give you this is the commercial part. I started comparing us to where Atlanta was when they got the DNC in '88. Atlanta by far was a smaller metropolitan area than we were when we got it in 2012. Atlanta in 8 years had the Olympics there. Because they took advantage of everything that was given to them in '88, attention, technology, you name it. They were very intentional about using it as a springboard. The reason why I'm excited, one of the reasons why I'm excited about the RNC is because of we get another shot at this. I mean, we already have some of the most advanced technology kind of on our towers downtown. I mean, you know, that's why the phone calls don't drop. We have redundancy. We're getting ready to get the next level of the technology that comes along with AT&T and Time Warner and all these folks are being ready to make sure that nothing happens on the national stage while that convention's here in town. So I would tell you that, and I don't even remember the question now, but I would tell you as a commercial, please be ready to take advantage of those opportunities. I mean, as that technology comes online again, and what we already have online, I mean, you know, we have, again, a horizontal platform that we can build a lot of things on that we should be taking advantage of. I mean, they're going to be looking for stories. I mean, the one thing that happened with the DNC is the media came in and, you know, where's the best place to have barbecue? Where's the best hot dog stand? They're going to be looking for stories. In addition to all the other stories that they're going to get, that they will get. I'll leave it at that. But I mean, still, you know, be prepared for those types of things. So I think what I'm trying to say is Charlotte has been given, lightning striking twice to be able to take a platform and some attention and build on it. So did I answer your question?
Yeah. Well, the problem with smart cities is it's such a broad topic, right? And we've covered a lot of ground, and just talking about a narrow slice of transportation, largely transportation, in the past hour and a
And it's
half.
not just transportation. That's what I guess we're all trying to tell you. I mean, we've all talked about how transportation may get a little bit of it, but I mean, it's not all transportation. I mean, smart cities is not just kind of in the technology, it's in how we take advantage of the smart people and the people in the city and think about the verticals and the businesses we can grow to.
Yep. No, well, none of this stuff would happen without wireless infrastructure, fiber optic infrastructure tied to that, all of the other, that all ties back to server farms and real people, and it's a fabulously complex system. So go ahead, Mike.
So it's critical to have that government support for a smart cities approach. It's also incredibly important to have entrepreneurs and small businesses and mid-sized businesses and large businesses contributing to it. It really requires designers to have a deep understanding of human needs and desires. I believe it's entirely possible to get everything kind of technically correct on paper and still end up with a city that people don't want to live in. I think an example of that is in China, where there's been this push to urbanize, and the government has pushed for and funded hundreds of billions of dollars to build cities from scratch that on paper should be the perfect cities, and yet some of these cities are virtually ghost towns because they haven't taken into account the challenges, the social and political challenges of bringing people from a rural environment into an urban environment. So that's just one example, but it's always so important to understand the human context and to really create a city that people want to live in.
I'm going to take the last question here, and then we'll call it a night for the formal portion. But I'm going to actually direct this one to Pete. It's a question about the corporate sector, and how much of a role do large corporations, remote or working or decentralized operations, have in the future of smart cities? You probably work with everyone on the panel, and you probably work the most with companies. So just if you have any thoughts about the corporate sector's involvement, where we haven't talked too much about it thus far at the time.
Yeah, I don't know that I need to touch on cyber with that. It's from the perspective of just dialing the clock back to the late 90s when everybody started to adopt the policy of work from home on Friday, right? And what that helped contribute toward in terms of quality of life for people and their work habits, right? And then we all started to look at it and say, hey, how come I can't do this on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday? The businesses started to look at it and say, I have like 300 people over here that don't need to be here at all, that can be remote, right? And start moving things around. I'm not the smartest person in that topic, but I think there's a pretty good corollary in the corporate world and that work from home mentality and how that contributed to sprawl. I personally am still baffled by the fact that in this day and age we all seem to be on the same roads at the same time, going the same direction. We haven't figured this out yet. Every time I'm sitting in traffic, I guess I did it for 20 years. I don't have to do it now. I can ride my bike to work if I want to, which is fantastic. But I'm still baffled in this society that we're still stuck in that same model, and we have to proactively move ourselves out of that model to start creating a different kind of society.
Yeah, things tend to change slowly until they change quickly. So,
Exactly.
well, thanks so much to our panelists tonight. I've got a question here. We'll take a live one from the crowd. Last question, bonus round. How many people here work from home some of the time? I think that, imagine all the cars that'd be on the road if that wasn't the case. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
Thanks everyone for coming. We're grateful to all of you. You did a great job. This was tremendous. A lot of great information. Thanks for being patient with us with some of our technology issues. We're really excited about our new home and plan to be here for most of our future events. So I hope you'll join us again. Our next Infinite Possibilities is at the very end of September. So we'll be in touch with some communications about that and any other events that we have coming up. One just housekeeping note, if you have any trash, if you don't mind taking it with you and dumping it in trash cans on the way out, that would be terrific. But again, if we can give one more round of applause to our speakers and